It is Friday, September 29th, 2017 at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Admissions Live. I'm your host, Adam Castro, and on today's live broadcast, we are talking about moving from a career in admissions and enrollment management to overall campus leadership. I'll be joined on the show today by Dr. Brian Ralph, enrollment manager at heart, and now current president at William Peace University in Raleigh, North Carolina. Admissions Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network. Our episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Be part of our live broadcast by sharing your knowledge. Participate in today's discussion by tweeting us using the hashtag HigherEdLive. All of our episodes are free and easy to access in the video archives at higheredlive.com, or take Higher Ed Live with you on the go by subscribing to the podcast on iTunes. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. Have you ever wondered what prospective teens are thinking when they receive and read or ignore your institution's recruitment marketing? The third study of the Myth-Busting series in partnership with NRCCUA is the first to focus on the complete enrollment marketing mix. We want to determine the ways colleges and universities reach prospective teens and encourage them to apply to your institutions. Sign up now to receive early access to the research results and white paper. Admissions Live is sponsored by NRCCUA, producers of the weekly EduVentures Wake Up Call newsletter. Subscribe and get weekly updates on the most pressing issues and trends in higher education, and I'll get a tweet out from the Higher Ed Live Twitter handle on that with a link so you can do that in short order. Again, don't hesitate to use the Higher Ed Live hashtag while we're going on today's episode to ask any questions and have those answered on the air. Well, I'm really excited to have today's guest on. He's a wonderful guy. You know, we've met over the years, particularly on social media, and I know him through people that I've worked with in the past, and everything I've heard that he's a tremendous guy with tremendous character and is making a significant mark in the higher education industry today. So Brian, welcome to Admissions Live.
Thank you, Adam. It is great to be here, and I probably should just stop now because that was the best introduction I've ever had. So.
All right, well, we'll shut everything down and we'll pick it up. No, so people want to hear your story. I think this is certainly a subject that particularly leadership and enrollment management think about a lot, but we don't talk about it a lot. So I think, you know, what we're going to talk about today is really going to shed a lot of light on how people like myself, who's very interested in this topic, kind of move up through this admissions, the admission ranks into enrollment management, into administration, and then ultimately to campus leadership. So why don't we start with a little bit of an introduction from you, talk a little bit about your background, your professional experience, and any kind of interesting facts you'd want our listeners to know about you.
Sure, great. Well, I was born and raised in Skaneateles, New York, which is in upstate New York. I've been married for 23 years, and I have 3 high school daughters. So I am wearing the college search / dad hat along with the presidential hat, and it is a very exciting but also horrifying experience at the same time. A couple neat facts. My father was an adopted first-generation college student of a single-parent household who paid his way through to earn a degree at Syracuse University and went on to great things. And he's been a huge inspiration to me. He emphasized education throughout our entire lives, and I have the privilege of being able to not only have pursued higher education myself, but also now get the privilege of leading a higher institution. And I know a large part of that is because of the emphasis that my dad put and value that he put on in education in particular, because he had worked so hard for his. So I have an undergrad in accounting, and the world is much better off that I'm not an accountant. And finished that up, went on and got an MBA in marketing and higher ed administration, and then started as an admissions counselor straight out of graduate school, actually about halfway through my master's program, doing some corporate interviews, and really was becoming disenchanted, and very fortunately had a great advisor, and sat down with her and said, hey, what do I do? And she said, well, have you thought about working in higher ed? And of course, the existential question, you can do that. But of course, she lined me up with a bunch of informational interviews, and I went and visited with folks in finance and student life and admissions, and ended up actually getting my very first job at the institution where I did an informational interview as an admissions counselor. So had a really neat start there, and then went back in '98 to get my doctorate. Did that full time while working full time, and that really wanted to get a field a little bit different than my kind of more hard business background. So I went and got a Ph.D. in communication with an emphasis in organizational communication and culture, which was an unbelievably enriching Ph.D. program. In the midst of that, I also had the privilege of starting as an associate consultant with Noel Levitz, and I started that in 1999, and actually was a consultant with them all the way until I became president here in 2015. Obviously took leave to focus on my work here. I was in admissions world for a number of years. Started as a admissions counselor, I mentioned, and then eventually became a director at age 26, which they were crazy to take a chance on me, but it worked out great. And then moved to Bethany College in 2000 for my first vice presidency, where I was vice president for enrollment, management, and marketing. So that was admissions, financial aid, marketing, obviously, and then international student services. And then I had the opportunity 3 years later to move to Queen's University in Charlotte, and started there in 2003 with a really exciting portfolio. I had admissions, financial aid, and all of student life. Which was really important to me in particular because I really wanted to focus on the entire life cycle of the student. One of the concerns I was developing even back then was that enrollment management was coming very front door oriented, and I really wanted to make sure that under my leadership that we were looking at the back door as well. And then a couple years after that, the president moved athletics into my portfolio as well. So I really was touching the entire student experience outside of the classroom, and that was an unbelievable run. I was there for about 12 and a half years, and then moved to here in August of 2015, and that's where I started my presidency here.
So I think, like most people, we now know that you stepped into admissions by dumb luck.
Absolutely, as most of us do.
As an accounting major,
yep.
we don't major in higher ed. That's at the undergraduate level. So I mean, it's amazing how similar my story is to yours, save the fact that I didn't go anywhere near accounting as an undergraduate student. So I mean, you touched on, you know, what kind of got you in enrollment management, and I think you summarized that really well. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, at what point of your career did the light go on saying, you know, I think I'm ready for, or I know I'm destined to be, you know, a campus president, and when did you start working toward that goal?
Sure. So one of the things that you'll find a consistent theme throughout my career has been very fortunate to have some really super people in my life that I looked up to and were willing to invest in me professionally and support me professionally, and also be truth tellers. And those are all really important characteristics to have in your group of colleagues. I think the first time that the idea of a president started forming was when I became a vice president for the first time at Bethany. And not that I thought that I was ready for it by any stretch at that point, but it was the first time I was sitting at the leadership table with the president and other vice presidents. And I remember just kind of getting the bug. I remember thinking, wow, this is pretty neat when you can get a chance to really put your fingerprints all over the direction of an institution and work with people to achieve that goal. And that's really where the spark started, and really where it got fanned into a flame, candidly, was by President Dwayne Cummins, who was the president at Bethany when I was there. And my second year there, he pulled me aside and he said, you know, I'm curious if you've been given any thought to a college presidency, because I see some things in you that I think could really, you know, be there and potentially position you well to be a college president, which of course was unbelievably humbling, but also very affirming and exciting. And it was, you know, at one point, you know, it's nice to have that kind of support behind you. And then the very next thing he did is he said, well, if we both think that this is something that you can do, I'd like to get behind you. And so he supported me going to Harvard's Institute for Educational Management at the ripe old age of 31. And I was totally out of my league in the sense that most of the folks in that program were much more mid-career, and but I just soaked it up. It was just a super experience. I know several of my classmates are presidents now throughout the U.S., and just a really great experience, and it was just a complete gift. And coupling that with just having the opportunity to be at a leadership table at Bethany really allowed me to kind of fan that flame and start getting excited about it. And then when I moved to Queens, I really, frankly, put that on the back burner because I inherited a much larger portfolio and had to learn a lot. And we had very, very aspirational goals to move the institution forward. And so I really didn't revisit it until maybe 5 years into when I was back at Queens, and felt like, not that we had it licked by any stretch, but it had a little bit of stability. And communicated to my boss, and who's still president there, Dr. Davies, and she was unbelievably supportive. And so then I started targeting kind of some programs that are run throughout the U.S. and there's all sorts of different ones out there that are designed to help you explore whether or not a presidency is the right thing for you. And so I went to the Aspiring to the Presidency workshop that was hosted up at by Paul LeBlanc up at Southern New Hampshire University one year, and did a couple other ones. And then one of the most significant ones for us was when we applied for a Lilly Foundation supported program by the Council for Independent Colleges called Presidential Vocation and Institutional Mission. And it's a year-long program. You're assigned a mentor who is a sitting president, and they pretty much require that you are with your spouse or partner and do the program together. And so my wife and I had the chance to do that, and it was just an incredible experience. And that's really when I felt like, okay, for the right opportunity, we're ready to jump. And so that was really exciting. And then, frankly, it was, I applied to a couple places here and there. And interestingly enough, the only interview I ever got was for this position. And so it's pretty extraordinary. But all those preparatory experiences were really helpful in just kind of bringing to clarity about what kind of institution I should try to lead.
And I think it's really important to note, that you did a lot of prep work. It wasn't that you just, created a decade or so of experience in enrollment management, but you went to these workshops, you made connections, you had a mentor before taking that leap. And I think that's a nuance that maybe some people miss if they're trying to move up in the career, even if it's from a director level to a VP level. It's not just experience that does it. It's, you have to have the right network, you have to have the right professional development. And so I think that's amazing advice. So let's talk about your tenure. So you're a little over 2 years into your tenure as president of William Peace University. Put on your admissions hat for us. Tell us a little bit about the institution and what are some of your initial priorities at the school.
Sure. So William Peace University it's an absolute gem, and of course I'm sure that none of you would be surprised if I thought anything less than that. We were founded in 1857, actually when we're Raleigh, North Carolina, originally founded as an institute that had primary grades for boys and girls, and then went through for women only all the way through high school and into college. Over our history, we morphed to a junior college for women only, and we were called Peace College at that time, and for a long time, originally founded as Peace Institute. And then in 1995, we started offering bachelor's degrees, again, only for women. And then in 2012, the board and my predecessor went forward the decision to take the institution coeducational, and then also change the name from Peace College to the full name of our founder, William Peace, to William Peace University. And we're roughly about 1,000 students, and believe it or not, we're already almost 50% male, which is just incredible in 5 years. A couple of unique facts about Peace, other than we have an incredible location here in an amazing city of Raleigh. We require 100% of our students to have an internship in order to graduate, and actually we have well north of that, or an additional percentage will grab a second internship along the way. We have a lot of unique academic programs. Our sciences are certainly strong, but we also have programs that are very oriented around this region. So as you know, technology is a huge base here in the Raleigh and Triangle region, and we have a simulation and game design major as an example, which is very popular. And so those are some of the key things that we have. And I would say the other thing that's relatively unique for our institution and for small private institutions is that we're incredibly diverse as an institution. We have a very rich cultural environment here. We don't have a single ethnic or race population here that's in a majority. So it just creates for a really dynamic and exciting campus environment.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, so coming from a small private institution, which I work as well, I'm really interested to know about the challenges that you've run into over these 2+ years, and how is William Peace kind of adapting to changes in student demographics and in changes in industry needs and things like that?
Sure. There's a lot of different things that we're grappling with. I'd say, at the macro level, some of these things that probably won't, surprise you is, obviously we're working really hard to, get our arms around some of the key variables that impact the campus climate. Understanding, things such as, diversity, inclusion, and free speech, and how we grapple with those issues as students are bringing a lot of those challenges to campus, and then obviously trying to solve those challenges while here on campus. And we have obviously a very important role in trying to facilitate that process. One of our other big challenges and that we think is a difficult trend is really trying to figure out how to engage a wireless, and I would argue very disconnected generation, and how do we get them engaged in the life of the institution and activities and things like that when they've been binge watching for the last 4 or 5 years, and having a lot of very structured activities in their lifetime, and being able to create spontaneity and those types of things. I think the other piece of it is we're dealing with a shrinking middle class across the United States, and a pipeline of students, frankly, and a generation of students who are questioning the very essence of what we do, both from a value standpoint and kind of an outcome standpoint. Those are things that we're grappling with at the institutional level that are going to be really important for us to solve going forward.
Yeah. So this is a question that I'm really interested to hear your response to. So enrollment management has not historically been the field in higher education where, presidents are necessarily groomed or certainly not plucked from directly. So I wanted to get your thoughts on why do you think that's been the case? And it seems like that's changing now in the field. And what are some of the factors you think are at play there?
Sure. I think a couple things. Obviously, we are in an industry that is an academic enterprise. And so I think that it's very logical that we have viewed higher education as a place where academic leadership and institutional leadership are synonyms. And that makes a lot of sense. And I think, frankly, in an environment prior to the last 30 years, that probably worked really well because there were not the market forces and other things that play into the dynamics that we now have to deal with in higher ed. So I think that one of the things is that, the institutions in general, I think, have a little bit of fear of the commodification of higher ed, and is bringing an enrollment leader into the top seat of an institution, further exacerbating that process. And so, understandable fear, and I think that it's one that enrollment leaders need to have a counter narrative for. And I think in particular, one of the things that we're going to struggle with as moving into these roles is that for the most part, and I don't want to make this a unilateral statement, but I think for the most part, institutions that do look at enrollment leaders for potential presidents are often all put in a similar bucket, and that is they are institutions that need to grow. And because of that, I would encourage enrollment leaders who are thinking about the presidency to ask yourself a couple hard questions. That as an enrollment leader, you've been exercising strategies solely focused on expansion, or have you been in an environment where you've perhaps been doing more of shaping and diversification, and obviously, or even retrenchment in some cases where institutions have grown too much. And so the skill set and experiences that you have are going to be very tight, are going to really pigeonhole you in some ways, not because you've done good or bad work, but simply because institutions that are going to be willing to explore an enrollment leader as president are going to have an agenda behind it. And certainly when I was brought here, we needed to grow, and the board of trustees and the search committee looked at my track record and very fortunately saw a long history of a lot of growth. And so that certainly made a lot of sense. I think that the second piece is that boards are becoming increasingly populated by corporate leadership, and those organizations are very bottom line oriented, understandably, and so they bring that level of orientation and accountability to institutional leadership, and look really carefully at how a future leader is going to be able to impact the overall organizational health. And enrollment, obviously, for most of us, is the primary revenue driver of our organizations. And boards are going to be attracted to people who have a clear understanding of enrollment strategy and how that enrollment strategy can potentially align the organization so that the rest of the goals of the institution are achieved. The one caveat I will share is that, and it's just, I'm only just starting my year 3, so I'm learning a lot every day. This is first and foremost a leadership position. And so while my background has served me incredibly well, the leadership experiences that I've had were just as, if not more important than the nuts and bolts and strategy development that I've had in enrollment. If I was simply trying to be an enrollment president, we would fail miserably, because I've got to spend my time and energy on leading this institution, not being a super senior VP for enrollment who happens to be the president. And I'm very fortunate I have a talented VP for enrollment and marketing that is leading that charge. And one of the things I would share on that front, and I know this is getting long here, but my president at Queens gave me unbelievably diverse leadership opportunities that really helped me cultivate a much broader understanding of the institutional dynamic and all the different pieces that play into ultimately being a president. A lot of our listeners today are probably in relatively traditional enrollment management positions that oversee admissions and financial aid, and maybe retention, maybe not, maybe registrar, maybe not, maybe a couple other things here and there. And because the president of Queens, Dr. Davies, really wanted the team to be leading the institution, of course, under her leadership, I got exposed to, capital projects, budget analysis, curriculum redesign, marketing and public relations. The fact that I had leadership over student life and athletics just gave me such unbelievable diversity of experiences that really have helped me hit the ground running here. And I realize those are rare. And so for those folks who are interested in that kind of pathway, whatever you can do to diversify your experiences and get your hands around other parts of the campus, even tangentially, is really, really important to understanding the institutional dynamic.
It's incredibly well said, and I think it points out that you had your eyes wide open when going into this. You knew that you were going to have to overcome the fact that you came from an enrollment management background in some, in some cases.
Absolutely.
And you came in armed to do just that. So I think that's incredibly important. I think people need to realize now, whether they're in a director of admission role, whether they're in a VPM role, that if you're not diversifying what you're doing on a day-to-day basis now, then you're just further delaying the chance to be in your seat and to be to run a campus. So I think that's incredibly well devised. And I was so interested in the fact, through the search process, and I can just imagine just being grilled by, division chairs on, your history and, not wanting to open doors and bring in too many students and, making sure, quality standards were remaining high. So I can just imagine what it was like, but obviously you did a good job during that process. So another thing that I'm really interested in is, I kind of equate this to football, right? So you went from being an offensive coordinator, right?
Yep.
You get the analogy,
Absolutely. Yeah,
vice president of enrollment management, to the head coach, the CEO of a campus. So, I think, there's probably a natural inclination to kind of migrate yourself toward, your field of expertise. So how have you adapted to that, and how have you made sure you're focused on the greater whole, not, where you're most comfortable?
Yeah, super question. I would encourage anybody to ask Dr. Chris Cohen, VP for Enrollment Management and Marketing here. She could probably give you a much better answer in some ways than I can. I suspect that I probably gravitate towards my background more than she would prefer. No, I think early on, especially as a first-time president, I had to fight the urge to kind of be a senior VP for enrollment, especially because my first year here, I did not have a vice president for enrollment or a director of admissions. And so I was, into the weeds a bit out of necessity. And we worked with Credo to have leadership there, which worked really well for us. I think that I'm doing pretty well with it. One of the fun things that I think has changed is that I get to think more about enrollment and not have to do as much enrollment. And so the fun parts are the conversations that I have with Chris Cohen and talking about, well, have we considered this? Have we thought about this? Tell me more about that. She and I want the same thing. We want WPU to succeed. And but we go about it she's unbelievably different than I am, which is a great thing. She brings different ideas and different perspectives, different approaches, many of which I would have never conceived on my own. And so in many ways, we work really well together. And, I wasn't sure when I was doing a search for a new VP for enrollment if I was gonna attract really talented people who were excited about the opportunity to work with a president with my background, or if it was going to scare some folks off because they rightly could assume that there would be some micromanagement and getting into people's sandbox. And hopefully I've balanced that well. And Chris has permission to tell me anytime she wants if I'm getting too close to her sandbox. But so far, it's been a great partnership.
That's great. And full disclosure for our listeners, yeah. Chris Cohen, I consider my mentor in higher education. I worked for her for several years when she was a vice president at Bloomfield College. So I think the world of her. And so Brian's in very, very good hands. So we don't have to feel bad, for Brian on the enrollment front at all. So, knowing what you know now, you've been through the process, you've been in your position for over 2 years. And it sounds like, you were, one of those guys that went in fully prepared. But is there anything else looking back that you would have done maybe differently or prepared a little bit differently to get you ready for this process?
Yeah, in general, I do feel unbelievably grateful for the diversity of experiences I had coming into this, because it did really help a lot. And frankly, where it probably helped me, it helped me a lot now, but it probably helped me just as much in the interview process, because I was authentically able to respond to questions from experience, whether it was, I had a chance to be part of our curriculum redesign at Queens, and to have the privilege to do that and work with faculty and just develop a completely different understanding than what I had before that was super valuable. I don't think you can ever learn too much about college finance. As much as closely as I've worked with my CFOs in the past and our current CFO here, there are just nuances to higher ed finance that are just really important to have your arms around. So I would say bone up on that however you can. And I think that, certainly the portfolio I had helped a lot. But a couple things, I had student life and athletics, but another area that I think is really, really important that I would have benefited a little bit more from is some of the legal issues of higher ed that were outside of the student area. I'd had a lot of work with Title IX, obviously having student life report to me at Queens, but there's a lot of other layers to that, and certainly being wise enough to know what you don't know is important. I think that in particular, getting to know the faculty experience. I had taught as an adjunct really, really early on in my career, and I think 20 hindsight, if I could have taught a course here and there a couple times, or even sat in on more courses, and if you don't take advantage of that, you should, no matter what level of the organization you're in now. I used to go sit in on classes periodically, and it's just super helpful to understand the classroom dynamic, but also to be visible with the faculty. And it's helpful to know your students and what kind of students are going to be successful at your place, but it's also really helpful in preparing for eventually leading a faculty ultimately in the institution. And I think the other thing is, I don't think you can ever learn enough about retention and student success. It's very easy in the enrollment management industry to be so focused on the next great class that you're going to bring in. If any of you put a little pencil to paper, if you do a little bit of math, you'll find out that you'd have to have a pretty year over year versus a couple percentage point increase in your overall retention to, from a volume standpoint. And it's easy for enrollment leadership to get enamored with the new and not take care of the ones you already have. And I think there's more, and I had done a fair amount of work in retention and student success, but we're operating at a completely different level here now, which is super exciting. We've got some really talented people who are very passionate about it. I've learned a lot in my time here just about what that really needs to look like here.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think, things like first year seminar or, volunteering, as part of your local NACAC affiliate, all those things where you can take a leadership role, I think, are extremely important. And I try to instill that in kind of the entry level, mid level staff, particularly on the admission side, because you get so caught up in travel, an avalanche of applications you have to review, and you lose sight of the fact that you have responsibilities, yes, but one of those responsibilities is to develop professionally, and a lot of that, because of just the way of the world in admissions, you have to do that on your own. And I think you're a perfect example of that. And you've talked a lot about, kind of the skill that, led you to this point and what you kind of developed over time. And it just makes so much sense to me that, this next wave of college presidents comes from, whether it's enrollment management or even the financial side of the house in some respects. This is a numbers game, whether we like it or not. We have super tight margins. There's discounting wars that I'm sure you're dealing with as much as I am. So, talk a little bit about maybe those more intrinsic skills and values you were able to develop on the admission side that have helped you, maybe not through the search process, but now that you're in your role and in the seat, that is helping you lead a university.
Yeah. Well, a couple things. One is, one of the first things I remember I learned as an admissions counselor very early on in my career was, the whole focus on the elevator speech. And I get more elevator I did my entire 20 plus years in enrollments. And I say that tongue in cheek, but you've really work hard on learning how to tell the story and do it well. Obviously, some of the other skills that are really important at this level is and how it can be deployed in a way that can really be helpful to your institution, but also very damaging to your institution. And I think that you only get part of the picture when you're in enrollment. You get to see the whole picture when you're at this seat. And I think the other area is that I think that is important is, this is going to sound really trite, but boy, oh boy, the quality of talent that you surround yourself with and place in your organization is just so critical to the success. And I know early on in my first director's position, just really trying to find a great, recruiter or admissions counselor who's going to do the great work. And that doesn't change. It just, in many ways, the cost of the miss just gets bigger and bigger, although one could argue and that I've often wondered if I should interview every admissions counselor that we have here, because it's just so critical. And having gone on a ton of college recently, because I've got a high school senior, I have been horrified at what I've experienced, and of course immediately want to know to make sure that we're not doing some of those things that I experienced as a parent. And of course I'm going to be the worst parent on the tour in regard to looking at that lens with a long history there. But having an eye on talent, and the other thing is not leaving anything to chance. Make sure you pay attention to every detail. And I know that in admissions, that is something that you really work hard to do. And it's easier to lose sight of that when you get to this level. And it can be really costly if you do. So don't ever give up on that kind of obsession for excellence.
I got a perfect question from Twitter that as a follow-up to that. Good. So it's the idea, and you were definitely alluding to it without saying it, but how similar is fundraising to recruitment?
A ton. It's very, very similar. That I don't know that there was a transition that I thought was going to be more difficult that has proven to be more natural than that transition. I have a blast doing it. I love sitting down with people and hearing their stories and making the connection and then ultimately the pitch. I'd say that one of the key things that I think that early on in my career that I was not very good at, it took a while to develop, was more of a listen first mindset and attitude, especially in the admission staff, because I was all about trying to, hey, these are our features, these are our benefits, this is what we're going to provide you, and this is why you need to choose X institution. And fundraising involves a whole lot more listening. Frankly, if I had done a better job of that, I probably would have helped more students find the right fit at some of the institutions I worked at, because you can respond to those fit questions a lot more easily when you listen first. That was a biggie, but I've found a lot of similarity and just as much joy in being able to tell the story and get people excited about investing in here.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was wondering about that myself. It's so similar. I mean, you're dealing with a much higher end clientele in some cases, but you still got to make the pitch, and you still got to believe in what you're talking about. I think that's incredibly important. We've touched on a lot of this, but for the mid-level admission professional out there that has grand plans for his or her future, what 1 to 2 pieces of advice would you give that person, knowing they're under, they're traveling all over their state or their region, they're buried under apps, they got to make these 40 calls to inquiries tonight. How can they help prepare themselves for this step, even if it's 10, 15, 20 years down the line?
Yeah. Number one is find a mentor. You've heard me use that phrase, and find people that are willing to invest in you. And I'm going to tell you that you cannot sit back and hope that you get cherry picked or asked, hey, can I invest in you? That is not what's going to happen. You need to watch people. You need to find people that you respect, and then you need to chase after them and say, hey, can I have 30 minutes of your time? And the next thing you know, that turns into an hour next time. And then it all of a sudden creates an opportunity where you're having exchanges. And that's just so critical to building your long-term future. And it certainly has played a huge role in my growth and development. The second thing is learn all you can, as much as you can. And I know this is an old saying, but read, and don't read the same stuff. Read from different sources, read from different perspectives. I'd encourage you to pick some Twitter followers that have completely different views on stuff, because it'll really round out your preparedness for understanding. I think one of the most important questions as you chart your course, and that is really trying to hone the campus fit that's going to work best for you. Because at the end of the day, if I'd learned anything in this journey, but in particular through the CIC program, is that there's a lot to be said for institutional fit. And one of the research items that CIC and others have discovered is that, as the average presidency tenure right now is running about 6.5 to 7 years, it's actually a bimodal distribution. And so there's a bunch of them that are 2 to 3 years long, and there's a bunch that are in the 12 to 14 range. And one of the common discoveries is that those short-term presidencies in most cases are just really bad fit situations. And sometimes it's because the campus read the candidate wrong, and sometimes it's because the candidate read the campus wrong. And so take the time now in your career to start really shaping what kind of environment excites you in a place where you think you can thrive, so that you don't get caught up in the noise of other opportunities that may not be great fits.
Sage advice. So I'm sure you wish you would have had that as a 24-year-old admission professional.
I do.
You had to learn it along the way. Everybody here now is getting it for free, so that's a beautiful thing. So we met on social media essentially, and I've been following you for a couple years, and so you obviously see the value of social media, of putting yourself out there. So I kind of want to get your sense on, was that a strategy of yours? Is it something that comes naturally? Obviously, coming from the admission side, you're not shy. So tell me how where that willingness came from and how it's kind of affected your ability to lead.
Yeah, so it is strategic. I have really tried to be an early adopter in technology mediums that make sense, and so and that's all about promoting the institution. And I was doing that as a VP for enrollment, and but also because I was overseeing athletics and student life at Queens, I really wanted, which is really where a lot of that really started to come to fruition. I really wanted our students to know how proud I was of them, and promoting institutional pride about the great successes that our students and our programs were having. And so I've carried that on to here, and in many ways it applies the exact same thing, and in some ways I think even more powerful, because of the chair I have the privilege to occupy. And so for our students to know that their president is cheering for them and is supporting them, and pushing stuff out about them, I think is a really good thing. I'm not sure if it's a good idea or not. I'm 2 years in, but I've accepted every LinkedIn and Facebook friend request that I've gotten from a student. If I can tell if they're students. Some of them don't have a piece listed in their profile or whatever, and so I don't, but that's very rare. So this gives me a really good perspective in the sense that it helps me know what's going on, and because I can, scan posts pretty regularly, I'm able to, if I see a student on campus and I can recall something that they posted, I can reference that and create a connection there very candidly, because most of our students use their own picture in their profile. It's an awesome way to reinforce face recognition with names, and that helps a ton on a small campus, because I do want to know our students as much as I can. I don't follow students on Twitter or Instagram. I mainly use those as push mediums, and don't mess with Snapchat just because I think it's too slippery a slope for a president. But I'm sure there are probably some presidents out there using it well, but I've decided to stay away from that. And I think my daughters are happy about that, frankly. But I think the one other thing that I think is important is that the medium has to be used in a way that advances what we're trying to accomplish. And so I want our students to know about the great things that are happening here, and our faculty and staff, and know that their president is proud of what's happening here. But I also want to make sure that it's a place that I can gain from the student experience. Don't get me wrong, there's a couple of things I wish I could unsee from social media from our students, but so far the benefits far outweigh the downside.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing, because I think there's a huge value to your students, both current and prospective, that you're on, Twitter as an example, and you're putting yourself out there, you're promoting the school. I just think that's the way they want to communicate. And even if they're not going to directly communicate with you, they see that, and they see you have pride in the institution, and that will certainly trickle down. But I still wonder where this is going to go, right? I mean, I follow several presidents on Twitter. I made it a point not too long ago to try to find and get a sense on how many college presidents were on Twitter, and you're definitely in a minority. I mean, it's not a lot of people are putting themselves out there, whether or not they may not be comfortable with social media, and I get that for some people. But I think it gives you a tremendous advantage, and others like you, a tremendous advantage, particularly with your students, because they're going to see you on a similar level and a similar generational interest level than they're on. And that's not going to change anytime soon. If anything, it's going to be a challenge for you to keep up with what's going on. And I totally hear you on the Snapchat thing. I can't figure it out. I went to NACAC. I actually went to, on purpose, a session on using Snapchat in recruitment and admissions, and I left even more confused than I came there. So I might be hopeless when it comes to Snapchat, but I get it for sure. So we don't have too much more time here, but I wanted to talk a little bit about challenges, because small private institution, in a metro market, I'm sure every day a new challenge is presenting itself. So what topics in higher ed, and particularly as it relates to William Peace University, are you kind of locked into right now, and really have on your radar for the next couple of years?
Sure. Well, this won't be a shocker, but we're obviously laser focused on our enrollment picture, and we happen to be in a state that has some really great demographic trends that are supporting us. Our new student class was up about 7.5% this year, which is great. But we want to grow in I think we should be about 60% bigger than we are right now. And I just saw the data from the Department of Ed came out this morning, I think, or maybe yesterday, about projection of higher ed is going to grow about 5% over the next 10 years, and that means that we're going to have to gobble up market share from elsewhere in order for us to get where we need to go. I think that our ability to welcome students who are coming from increasingly diverse and increasingly varied levels of preparation for college is going to be another huge challenge for higher ed, and certainly for us. As we continue to see consolidation of school districts and kids are graduating, I've got 3 daughters in high school right now, and their high school is 2,200 kids, and it's a solid high school. But when they're, what are the odds that they're going to look at a college that's half the size of their high school? And so we're going to have to continue, especially the smaller privates, continue to boldly carve out our niche and differentiate in ways that are profound and very discernible and very clear. And that's increasingly difficult to do in the sea of sameness when you've got 1,400 private colleges in various sizes. We've got 36 independent colleges just here in the state of North Carolina, and I know that those in Ohio and Pennsylvania and New York would love to have that kind of ratio compared to the hundreds that they have in those markets in a declining environment. So I think the demographics are going to be a big piece for us. I think the thing is just continuing to make sure that we're clearly demonstrating why investing in education like ours is a valuable investment. And Joanne Soliday from Credo has this great saying, and I'm going to botch her quote, but it's something to the effect of, won't it be great when higher ed will be known for the graduates that it produces, not the students that don't get admitted. And I think there's just so much truth to that. We have such an emphasis on whose admit rate's the lowest this year. And what we're really hoping, obviously, is looking at, what kind of graduates are we producing, what kind of lives are we equipping our graduates to lead. And those are real challenges for a place like us, where our graduation rate's nowhere where it should be, and we're bringing in students that are and not across the board. We've got a lot of great students here, but we've got some that are first generation that are trying to figure this out for the first time. And if, in my opinion, if we're making the decision to admit them, we're promising them right at that moment that we're going to do everything we can to help them succeed and graduate. And that means we need to take that promise seriously and resource that. And that's going to be a challenge if we don't grow at the rate that we need to grow. I think just one other item I think it is important is that as we continue to look at what's going to happen on the policy side at the national level, and frankly, the social side that's being influenced by what's happening at the national level, it is really, I think, putting institutions in a very precarious position of how do we continually educate on multiple fronts? And that's a complex question, because certainly what happens in the classroom dynamic or labs or field experiences, most of us are hopefully pretty darn good at that. But how we weave in the social experiences and some of the contextual narratives that are part of our society today, and how we weave that in a way that is helpful and can move conversation forward is very, very tricky. It's in many difficult circumstances for our faculty. We're having to confront questions, and not that these questions shouldn't be asked, but they're having to confront questions that they've not had to grapple with in a very long time. And let's face it, there's a lot of stuff that we're dealing with right now that has a lot of ambiguity around it, and whether it's going to be at the policy level or otherwise, that we need to be pretty nimble about. And Title IX is a great example of just what's transpired in the OCR changes just in the last 2 weeks.
Yep. And I know that when you said that 60% number, Chris's ears started ringing a little bit. But remember, it's recruitment and retention. These are
absolutely right.
That's something that I'm preaching on my campus is, we've had a very good run of bringing in new student classes, but if you're not moving the needle with retention, you're not growing at nearly the pace that you could be. So I think that, again, that is some great advice and to consider. So we need to wrap this up. It's been unbelievable talking to you. And I think this episode has been just chock full of good advice and things that, people can use. But I really want to kind of end with, what's next for Dr. Brian Ralph? I mean, how are you going to keep getting better? What's your next project? What are you going to be working on in the near future?
Yeah, well, thank you for this opportunity. This has been a blast. Talking offline before this, I shared with Adam just how much fun it was, even just thinking about having this conversation today, because it's a dream come true, and I'm thrilled. So I think a couple of things. One is, I've got the privilege of a really great opportunity here, and as far as I can see, this is going to be all about me pouring everything I've got into William Peace University. We've got a terrific story to tell here, and a lot more chapters yet to be written, and I'm really privileged to be leading that effort. We just authored a new strategic plan that has really 4 really exciting themes focused on immersive learning, innovative partnerships, strategic growth, and then also our distinctive identity. And so we're going to work real hard at that for a while to really bring that plan to fruition, and we're excited about that. And I think that as far as going forward, that's really what my focus is on, is helping us achieve our potential. And we've got a lot of things working well for us right now. The city of Raleigh is just on an incredible ascent. North Carolina is a great destination and is an attractive place to live. And so we've got a lot of things that are in our corner to help us. And we've got a super talented faculty and staff and people who are really excited about helping us achieve our vision. And I think it's going to be an exciting journey to do that.
Well, I know that William Peace University is in great hands, under your leadership, and it's really exciting. It sounds like you're doing just amazing things, and I certainly will be following along, seeing how you're doing and seeing how the institution is doing over these next couple of years. And obviously, I wish you the best of luck, and take it easy on Chris. She's amazing. She'll work her tail off, and she'll bring in those classes for you. Have no fear. Before we leave, I just want to let everybody know, Brian's an amazing follow on Twitter, so I encourage you to do so at Brian W. Peace UPrez, P-R-E-Z. You can also follow me on Twitter at Adam Castro EDU. Thank you as always to M Stoner. You make us go. A big thank you always goes out to our program sponsor, NRCC-UA as well. Brian, it was an absolute pleasure. We'll have you back on soon. Sound good?
Sounds great, Adam. Hey, if I could just let me correct that handle. It's at WPCU Prez. I think
at WPCU Prez.
Yep,
Sorry about that. Thank you for the clarification.
All right. Thank you all.
Until next time, this is Admissions Live. Have a great day.